Hey everybody, and welcome back. Today we are talking about some Appalachian true crime history in Abingdon, Virginia. This one's going to have you on the edge of your seat. On March 13th, 1942, Special Agent Hubert Tracy Jr. was gunned down by a pair of Army deserters in an Abingdon, Virginia restaurant. Another agent was seriously wounded. After the shooting, a fierce gun battle ensued, and the fugitive soldiers were captured by FBI agents and local officers a few hours later. Here's how the story unfolded. On March 11, 1942, Charles Lovett, 21, of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and James Edward Testerman, 22, of Glade Spring, Virginia, who were assigned to a machine gun troop, 3rd Cavalry, Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, decided to desert from the U.S. Army. Shortly after midnight on March 12, 1942, Lovett and Testerman entered the room of Sergeant Clifton H. Hall, who was in charge of quarters, and bludgeoned him into unconsciousness with an iron bell on the mess hall porch. They then stole 4 .45 caliber U.S. Army Smith & Wesson revolvers and approximately 100 rounds of ammunition. The men escaped from the military reservation and reached a nearby highway. Testerman and Lovett then commandeered a taxi cab and forced the driver at gunpoint to take them from Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, to a site near Cleveland, Tennessee. At that location, the driver was forced from the cab, searched, and robbed of $23, and the fleeing deserters continued on with the automobile. The fugitives proceeded to Sweetwater, Tennessee, where they abandoned the cab. Then they traveled by bus to Abingdon, Virginia, where they arrived late in the afternoon and spent the night at an inn. En route to Abingdon, however, they stopped at Knoxville, Tennessee, and purchased a handbag in which they would carry the firearms and ammunition without attracting attention. In the meantime, a vigorous investigation was being conducted by the FBI. The Knoxville field office was notified of the activities of these soldiers on the morning of March 12, 1942, and agents were dispatched from several FBI field offices to apprehend the deserters. At 9:35 a.m. on March 13, 1942, Special Agent Hubert J. Tracy Jr. and Charles L. Tigner, to whom this particular phase of the investigation was assigned, were driving into Abingdon, Virginia, when Agent Tracy observed 2 soldiers walking along the street that resembled the descriptions of Lovett and Testerman. The agents parked their car and walked into a diner off Main Street called Pat's Cafe, which the soldiers had entered a few moments before. The suspects were sitting in a booth and had given their orders to waitress Mary Sue Johnson for breakfast. Agents Tracy and Tigner approached the booth, identified themselves as agents of the FBI, explained they were looking for 2 deserters, and asked the soldiers for their identification. And then without warning, Lovett suddenly produced a .45 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver from his belt and fired at Special Agent Tigner, who was knocked to the floor and wounded in the right arm. In the same motion, Lovett turned the gun on Special Agent Tracy as he was drawing his revolver. Lovett shot him in the face, and the impact knocked Agent Tracy to the floor. Lovett turned and fired several more shots at Agent Tigner, who was attempting to draw his revolver with his left hand. According to Mrs. Johnson, the waitress at Pat's Cafe, Lovett fired again at Agent Tracy, who was lying face down on the floor. Testerman had risen from his seat in the booth and fired a final shot into Agent Tracy's back, while Mrs. Johnson shouted for the men to stop shooting. Agent Tigner rose from the floor of the cafe and attempted to pursue the murderers, but collapsed after reaching the street due to his injuries. Mary Sue Johnson later recalled that, quote, neither of the federal men fired a shot. Both agents were taken to an Abingdon, Virginia hospital immediately. Special Agent Hubert J. Tracy Jr. was pronounced dead upon arrival at the hospital. A bullet entering his back caused his death. Agent Charles L. Tigner was seriously wounded and was confined to his hospital bed for several weeks as the result of receiving 5 gunshot wounds in the chest, right arm, and left hand. After running from the cafe, Lovett and Testerman unsuccessfully attempted to commandeer an automobile belonging to Tommy Helton, a grocery store operator, as well as another automobile occupied by 4 women. They did, however, finally secure a car belonging to a local citizen and fled the scene to Taylor's Hill, a section of Abingdon, Virginia on Wiley Street just behind the African-American section of Sinking Springs Cemetery. There, they commandeered the home of Etta Wheeler and her 80-year-old mother, effectively holding them hostage in the basement of their home. Ms. Wheeler later recalled that Testerman told her that, quote, we are just disregarding the law. Don't say a word or I will kill you. As police and FBI began to arrive at the scene, the two fled the Wheeler house to the house next door and barricaded themselves in its basement. Etta Wheeler's neighbor's house on Wiley Street, with the fugitives inside, was quickly surrounded by a posse of law enforcement officers, including FBI, Abingdon PD, and numerous other officers from surrounding communities who had been attending an FBI civilian defense school at Bristol, Virginia. A gun battle ensued, and many rounds were exchanged between the fugitives and law enforcement. After 4 hours, a sufficient amount of tear gas had entered the basement to cause Testerman and Lovett to throw down their guns and walk out with their hands in the air. A federal grand jury at Harrisonburg, Virginia, returned a true bill of indictment on March 19, 1942, charging Testerman and Lovett with the murder of Special Agent Tracy. The trial of the case began in the U.S. District Court at Abingdon, Virginia on April 15, 1942. On April 17, 1942, the deserters were found guilty of murder in the first degree following a jury trial. Upon the recommendation of the jury that capital punishment not be imposed, a U.S. District Judge at Abingdon, Virginia, sentenced both individuals to life imprisonment. Later, a federal judge in Georgia found the two guilty of assault on a government officer, robbery of government property, and transportation of stolen government property. Agent Charles Tigner survived his injuries and lived to the age of 101. In 2017, a historical marker was erected in Abingdon in memory of Special Agent Hubert Tracy, Jr. He was a member of the Knights of Columbus, Friendly Sons of St. Patrick of New York, American Irish Historical Society, and Quartermaster Association, and was survived by his widow, his mother, and his two sisters. Information in this video comes from FBI.gov, articles from the Bristol Herald-Courier, and the Associated Press. Thank you for going back in time with me to look at some Appalachian true crime history. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next video.